Dear guests, today's first panel focuses on new developments and challenges for policies towards sustainable agriculture in Brazil and in Denmark. First, we will hear Flemming Nørre Petersen, Executive Director of the Danish Agriculture and Food Council.
Thank you. Governor, Senator, Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, let me begin by thanking the Embassy of Brazil in Copenhagen for organizing this conference. And thank you also for inviting me to say a few words here today on how we look at the challenges and the opportunities facing us. We, in this case, being the Danish Agriculture and Food Council, representing suppliers, farmers, the food industry, so we are all part of the same value chain in Denmark. And thank you also to those of you joining from abroad to engage in a dialogue with the Danish private sector and with our government. In Denmark, we have an international mindset. We believe in international trade and cooperation. That is especially the case for the Danish food cluster, which we represent in my organization. We export more than 70% of our agricultural and food production to all parts of the world. And of course, we are very much aware of consumer demands and market trends globally. We have a strong focus on partnerships in delivering on the SDGs and also on the climate agenda. Therefore, the conference today is very timely in discussing and sharing knowledge on how to contribute to the challenges and the sustainable food supply in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, in a recent Danish government strategy on deforestation-free supply chains, our government underlines the importance of a closer dialogue on sustainability issues between producer countries like yours and countries buying commodities and foodstuffs. Denmark is both an importer and an exporter, depending on the commodity or the foodstuff in question. I agree with our government. We cannot do much alone, but if we work together in the value chain, we can accomplish almost everything. Dialogue, knowledge sharing, and cooperation has always been the key to finding better solutions. And I hope that this conference today will lead to new contacts being made and to a closer dialogue and cooperation on sustainable solutions between our two governments, between businesses, and between private and public research institutions in our two countries. Climate change and loss of biodiversity are among the greatest global challenges we are facing. At the same time, the world's population is rising to about 10 billion people in 2050. All these people need to eat. We all need food every day. Food production has an impact, we know that, that's a fact. And we must find out how to produce more with less input and with less negative impact. In fact, we need much more focus on resource efficiency, circular bioeconomy, and in general, how we produce and consume without any losses. Farmers and food producers all over the world have reason to be proud of their contribution to feeding the world. We need to see agriculture and food production as part of the solution, not just as part of the problem. So if I could have just one wish for today, and for the future discussions, it could be, let's talk about solutions, let's talk about development, let's join forces and work to identify solutions to lower the impact from farming and food production, while still being able to supply a growing world population with healthy and sustainable diets. And let's stop pretending that shutting down agriculture or limiting our own production to what can sustain our own national population is the solution. It's not. It never was, and it will never be. It will not bring food to an increased global population, and it will not bring us the technical solutions and scientific breakthroughs that we need. We must work on improving our production And in our part of the world, we should modify not just the production methods, but also our consumption patterns, including our eating habits. But shutting down international supply chains is not an answer to the challenges we are facing. It will only move production to regions where production is less efficient, and it will lead to a less efficient use of resources and higher emissions, the exact opposite to what are needed. As I mentioned, the Danish Agriculture and Food Council, which I represent here today, represent the whole value chain. We have set out to be among the leaders in the journey towards a more sustainable and climate-friendly food system. And we have a vision for the Danish food sector to become climate neutral by 2050. I know it's ambitious, but we also need to be ambitious. Our vision is now being backed by the recent agreement by the Danish Parliament on a binding carbon dioxide reduction target for agriculture in Denmark. Becoming climate neutral in 2050 is not going to be easy, but it is important to lead the way, otherwise we will never get there. The work has started, and it is not just a vision or clever communication. Since 1990, Danish agriculture has reduced the emission of greenhouse gases by 16%, while at the same time producing 35% more. Today, the Danish dairy cow produces almost 100% more milk than it did 40 years ago. Another example is the partnership Danish Protein Innovation. In this partnership, we aim at new climate-friendly and sustainable production methods of protein for feed and food, starting with biorefining of grass, making it high-value feed for pigs and poultry. A third example is to develop new technologies that can help reduce emissions from pig stables. The list of examples could be long, but still, we do not know all the steps on the way to get to climate-neutral production. In fact, we only know about half the way to the goal. So how do we get to the finishing line? We need to work together in partnerships and new alliances, locally and globally, from farmers to universities, to governments and green organizations. We need to think out of the box, to think big, to aim high, and to do it across sectors and borders. Research and innovation are important parts of the answer. Much more research and innovation is needed, both basic and applied research, within specific areas as plant breeding, animal nutrition, and food microbiology, within and across different production systems, whether conventional or organic, but also research across professions and sectors. Lisbeth Henriksen, one of my colleagues from SEGES, which is responsible for research, innovation, and dissemination of new technology and knowledge, will talk more in detail on this issue later in a panel discussion. But let me just give you one more example, SkyClean. It sounds almost too good to be true, but experts from the Technical University of Denmark and Aarhus University estimate that agriculture in Denmark can reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 50% using this new SkyClean technology. At the same time, we can introduce climate-neutral aviation fuel. The technology uses straw and slurry from agriculture to produce climate-neutral aviation fuel and to bind carbon at the same time in the soil. I mean, what's not to like? It's not a technique that is ready for departure tomorrow, but projects and ideas like this are among the long-term solutions to our climate challenges. In Denmark, we want to be among the front runners. We want to develop intelligent climate solutions, solutions that can be implemented not just in Denmark, but in the whole world. Because the challenges are global, food chains are global, research and innovation are global in nature. Looking at isolated local solutions and supply strategies simply doesn't make sense. We must work together. We like to develop the solutions for sustainable food supply in partnership with other ambitious players around the world, like your country. I must also mention our role as buyers of commodities. Approximately 10% of the feed for our pigs and poultry in Danish agriculture is soy meal. Soy is a high-yielding crop. It fixates nitrogen naturally, and it is an excellent source of protein for the animals. We import most of the soy either directly from South America or indirectly from Germany or the Netherlands. It adds up to approximately 1.5 million tons a year, a modest amount when compared with the production in Brazil and globally, but a lot when considering the size of Denmark. We export more or less the same amount of feed grain, and this is exactly how international trade works. We each do what we do the best. The national and international consensus on the need to fight climate change and biodiversity loss means that our member companies and also their customers, as well as politicians, are not only focusing on how we can reduce the impact of our production nationally, but also the global footprint of our production and consumption. Reducing their carbon footprint is a central element of company sustainability policies. More and more food companies have policy goals of being able to document that their supply chains are not directly or indirectly causing deforestation. And the Danish Agriculture and Food Council has a policy for buying responsible and deforestation-free soy. And the European Commission has announced a proposal on rules on deforestation-free supply chains mid-November this year. Both the political and the commercial reality is calling for traceability in our supply chains. In my opinion, we must be careful that public and private policies to achieve this are carefully developed and in cooperation with the suppliers so that they lead to engagement on both sides in sustainable solutions and supply chains. The alternative to working together is the very present danger of risk avoidance behavior, where European buyers try to avoid buying from regions of the world where there is still a substantial forest cover. This is not be likely to halt deforestation, as Europe, despite our sometimes slightly inflated self-image, only covers a modest part of the trade flows. I hope that this aspect will also be part of the discussions today. In that case, this conference is all the more timely. Let me conclude by underlining the need for cooperation, knowledge sharing, and partnerships internationally in order to develop a more sustainable food supply. We already know in what direction we want to go in Denmark, and if we work together, we can go faster. Once again, thank you for inviting me. I wish you a fruitful conference today. Thank you.
Just a brief remark about questions. You may have noticed the information on your table with the links. We now call Marcus Young, Senior Professor at INSPER, School of Economics, Business Law and Engineering. Fernando Sampaio, Executive Director of the program Produce, Conserve and Include Strategy from the state of Mato Grosso, and journalist Mette Vestergaard as moderator. Panel starts, we will show a brief video.
I'm speaking to you from Embrapa Cerrados, just outside Brasilia, where innovative low-carbon agriculture technologies are helping to increase productivity of Brazilian farming by avoiding harmful deforestation and creating green jobs for Brazilians. And this is precisely the type of innovation the world needs if we're going to keep the critical goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees alive. So I urge Brazil to showcase this pioneering work and bring other countries on this journey. The UK is championing such efforts through our international climate finance funded projects. We must all work together to grasp the opportunities that technology provides. That is absolutely vital to set in train the greener, brighter future that we all want to see.
Yes, this is done. Well, thank you. And thank you for welcoming us up here. Should we do it again? So welcome to these following two panels on sustainable agriculture. The first is going to be on sustainable agriculture policies in Brazil and Denmark with the underline of new developments and challenges. The second one will dive into the aspect of the Brazilian and the Danish contributions for multilateral rules on sustainable agriculture goals. So I would like to dig into just a little longer presentation of our two panelists here. Then they will each give an opening remark on the floor. And after that, we'll have a discussion, and I certainly hope that you will participate in this discussion. This is your chance to ask these nice people all the questions or share your reflections. And Adriana mentioned, I think, where to address your questions. I want to just hold up this piece of paper because there is the address, the web address, in which you can go into the chat. There's a chat icon that you click on, and you can write your questions there. And I'll get an iPad up here, and I'll take your questions and direct them to the appropriate panelist. So please don't hesitate to do so. There, Marcos Jank. We'll start out with you. Marcos Jank, I want to tell the audience, is a senior professor of global agribusiness at what is called the INSPIR School of Economics, Business, Law, and Engineering, and he's also the coordinator of INSPIR Agro Global. Professor Jank has 32 years of professional and academic experience, including teaching and research in top Brazilian colleges, high-level positions in the private sector, in Brazil's principal sugar energy trade association, and one of the leading agribusiness think tanks called ICONE. He holds board positions in several institutions and companies in Brazil and abroad, and he has actually spent quite a few years, 10 years, in Europe, the US, and in Asia. So for a opening remark, Professor Jank, please take the floor, and let's welcome him once again, because it makes us so happy to applaud.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very honored to be here in Denmark. The last time I came to this country was on COP event here. It was very cold at that time, and it was the beginning of the journey. I was the president of the Brazilian Sugarcane Industry Association, representing the biofuels case here in town at that time. And I see lots of movement since there, especially today. Not only movements from governments like US, China, Europe, very committed to the climate change issue, but also the private sector. This is happening today. So the private sector is really involved in trying to reduce emissions. Today I am participating in boards of several companies in Brazil on the soy sector, on the beef sector, and all of those companies are today trying to establish zero deforestation supply chains, monitoring, traceability, and many other actions, as you saw before. So thank you very much for this invitation. Let me be very brief, just a few slides to show the case here. So I think that Governor Mauro, and also Senator Irajá and Fernando Camargo, they presented a little bit about what's the Brazilian agri-food sector today. So the agri-food sector is 20% of the GDP. It's 50% of Brazilian exports and 20% of the labor. And Brazil is today the third largest world exporter, just behind US and Europe. So it has been growing a lot. And this year we are going to export $120 billion just after the pandemic. And the reason is because of the demand in Asia. It's not Europe anymore. It used to be Europe in the past. So 20 years ago, our main client was Europe, representing 50% of our exports. Today, Europe represents 16%, 1/6, and China alone represents almost 40%. So there is a new geography of trade, agri-food trade, in the direction of Asia and very especially to China. The reason that we are exporting so much is because of the, I would say, the innovation in tropical agriculture that we had, with cases that were presented before, on the transformation of soils, genetic improvement, especially African grasses and Indian cattle, and soybeans. Soybeans used to be produced in the south of Brazil, in temperate climate, in subtropical climate. And today we are producing soybeans very close to the equator. Very high production. And in the same area that we can produce soy, we produce corn or cotton. So we can produce soy and corn, soy and cotton in the same season, using the rain season without irrigation. And this is possible in the tropics. This is not possible in Denmark. This is not possible in the US. And what we did in terms of adaptation of plants, in terms of crop-livestock integration, is not only a solution for Brazil, but could be a solution for the whole tropical area of the planet. It's possible to produce 2 or 3 crops a year in tropical conditions if we manage the soil, if we manage the plants, if we manage the cattle. And this is the base of the revolution that we saw in our country. We also have a very interesting experience in biofuels. So as Senator Irajá mentioned, our energy matrix is almost 50% renewable. The electric matrix is 80% renewable, if you only consider electricity. If we consider all energies, it's 46% renewable. And one of the reasons is because of biofuels. Biofuels alone, they represent 18%, 18% of the Brazilian energy matrix, which is a lot. We have a huge experience in the beginning, ethanol that's blended into gasoline. All gasoline in Brazil contains 27% ethanol. All diesel in Brazil contains 10% biodiesel. And we have flex fuel cars. So 80% of the new cars in Brazil are flex fuel. So all consumers can buy a flex fuel car and they can pump the car with ethanol, for example, just ethanol, pure ethanol. So this is one of the issues we got. And also people. This is extremely important, technology and people. People migrating from the south of Brazil to the center-west that was impossible to produce 40 years ago. Differently of what happened in Europe or in US, where you had an agricultural revolution centuries ago, converting, you see, land into production. We did that in the last 40 years in Brazil. And it was because of the technology, but also because of skilled labor, skilled people, skilled farmers coming to the new regions. Okay, so this is the agri-food trade balance in the world. Brazil is today the largest agri-food net food exporter. If we consider exports minus imports, Europe exports much more than us, but Europe also imports a lot. And we are exporting a lot, but importing very little. And our main client is here, is China, as you are seeing. It's really our big client today. We are basically exporting commodities. We don't export value added. This is the difference with Denmark. Denmark has much more value added in their exports. You have Europe as client, so you can access the whole continent. And for us, we are basically a commodity, a traditional commodity exporter. Soybeans, meat, forest, sugar, corn, cotton. 10 products, maximum 10 products. The client today is China. Huge increase, 20% a year increase in the last 20 years. We used to export $1 billion per year to China 20 years ago, and today is 40 billion dollars. So huge increase in China, huge increase in other countries in Asia. and in Middle East. So those are our markets today. And the reason is because we had very important productivity gains. If we look at the total productivity factor, productivity of agriculture in Brazil, we are talking about 3% a year in the last 20 years, 2.4% a year of productivity gains since 1980, much more than US, more than Europe. And the reason of our huge productivity gains in Brazil is because of the technology to enter in tropical areas, producing 2-3 crops a year. So the productivity levels have been increasing a lot in Brazil. The big challenge for us is to feed Africa and Asia, especially South Asia, India, and Africa. This is when we talk about food, sustainable food, sustainable means for sure preserving the environment, but sustainable means how to feed 3 billion people in Africa and South Asia today, and this number will be 5 billion people in 2050, and 7 billion people in 2100, in 80 years from now. And when we look at this graph, it's very important because this is a very interesting study by IFPRI showing where healthy food is in which parts of the world people can eat healthy food. And you can see healthy food means a balanced plate, okay? Having fruits and vegetables, having proteins, having carbs in the equilibrated manner. A healthy plate is accessible, is cheap in the yellow areas of this graph, especially Europe, US, Australia, and South America, I would say. When it comes to Africa and Asia, most of the countries, they cannot access healthy food because it's too expensive. They can access cheap carbs, they can access snack foods, tubers, sugar, very cheap food, but not the best food. If you want to go to fruits and vegetables, eggs, meats, fresh fish, this represents 40 to 170% of the revenue of an income family in those parts of the world. So this is a graph showing how much it costs to eat healthy food in different countries compared to the family income. And it's a catastrophic map, correct? In the way that the regions that will have more population coming in the future, more urbanization, are the regions where food is very expensive, in part because it's too costly. Because we don't have infrastructure in these parts, we don't have refrigerators, we don't have modern food service, so this is the reason. In the case of Brazil, we have 30% of the area occupied by pastures and agriculture, so 10% agriculture, 20% pastures. And what we are seeing today is a movement of migration of agriculture to pasture areas, what we call crop livestock integration. Crop livestock integration is the future for our country. 20, 30 years ago, it was very difficult to produce crops in pasture areas. But we've been adapting the technology, and right now we are showing the increase of agricultural production in pasture areas. This is what we call crop livestock. This is the 90 million hectares of available land in Brazil. It's basically pastures that can be converted into crops or better pastures, or increasing productivity, intensification. This is the movement, the real movement that we are seeing today in Brazil, only this year we had an expansion of 3 million hectares of areas in pastures to produce soy, corn, cotton, etc. But what's our problem is that we are still seeing deforestation, especially in the Amazon, 1 million hectares per year. When we look at deforestation in Brazil, it used to be very high in the 80s, in the 90s. In 2004, deforestation levels were 2.8 million hectares per year in Brazil. But look here in 2014, in 2012, we reduced it from 2.8 million hectares to 500,000 hectares. We reduced 80% deforestation in Brazil in 8 years. So it's possible to reduce deforestation in Brazil. And to make it, we need command and control, which means acting against criminal settlers, people that are invading the land. Let's remember that 65% of the deforestation rate in Brazil, 1 million hectares today, 65% comes in public lands, in parks, natural reserves, indigenous areas, rural settlements that were created 40 years ago, and land that don't belong to anyone, what we call terras devolutas, land that's not public and not private, which is, this kind of land is an invitation to criminals, to occupation. So the solution in Brazil is, first of all, law enforcement, application of the Brazilian law in the whole country, but especially in the Amazon biome. The second solution is the implementation of the Forest Code that was mentioned by Governor. The Forest Code had 10 years discussion in Brazil to achieve consensus, and it was approved in 2012. And some states like Mato Grosso are much better than others in the implementation. That's why Mato Grosso can come here and say we are going to be a carbon neutral state in 2035. One of the reasons is because Mato Grosso is implementing the Forest Code in a very efficient way compared to other states. But we have bad cases in Brazil because the implementation of the Forest Code is an issue for the states. And the third is the land tenure regularization in Brazil that was mentioned by Senator Irajá, the necessity to give titles to people, especially in the north parts of the country, because invasions are happening without titles. And if you don't have land titles, if you don't have the owner of the land, you cannot apply the law. So we need to make the regularization of the land in Brazil. This is a problem, an historic problem. It's not from this government, previous government. It's an old problem, especially in the north part of the country, and we needed to advance all the titles. So these are the public policy challenges. I could talk later about the private sector engagements, which are very huge today. Thank you very much.
There's already a few questions dropping in, among others from Mr. Ebenskar. Please keep them coming. We'll take them right after the opening remark from our next panelist, which is now speaking about the commodities and among others, the meat. Fortunately, we have a meat expert here, Mr. Fernando Sampaio. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Sampaio is the executive director of Produce, Conserve, and Include strategy, the so-called PCI strategy from the state of Mato Grosso, from which you met the governor earlier on. Mr. Sampaio holds a background as an agronomist. He has specialized in the meat market, as I said. He has held the post of sustainability coordinator at the Brazilian Beef Exporters Association and is also a former member and a former president of the executive committee of the Brazilian Roundtable for Sustainable Livestock. Mr. Sampaio, for an opening remark, please.
Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Ambassador, I remember when we have been together some years ago in London to talk about agriculture, and I'm happy to be here today. Governor Mauro Mendes, our friends from Mato Grosso and Denmark. I'm going to present you an initiative from the state of Mato Grosso that is one of the instruments that Mato Grosso has to deliver its carbon neutrality goals that our governor presented. But the first message that I want to pass to you is that all the efficiency that we have in Brazilian agriculture today is due to the fact that Brazil was inserted in a global market. The market is a big engine to push for efficiency in land use. And of course, we all here know the challenges that we have to address. That's a growing demand for global commodities, especially coming from Asia. And there's a huge climate crisis that we have to address. And the PCI is what we call a jurisdictional sustainability approach. So we are not talking about sustainable soy or sustainable beef. We are talking about a sustainable landscape and how we define a sustainable landscape. Well, the whole idea of the PCI is that we put all the stakeholders together on the table, the government, the private sector, the civil society, the people that are interested in that specific landscape, and we imagine the future that we want 10 years from now, 15 years from now. So we build a shared vision to find the balance between production, conservation, and inclusion. And the idea that we have is that we can produce more to attend the global demand for commodities. We can conserve the environmental assets that we have, and we can include smallholders, indigenous population on this process of economic development. So we have this multi-stakeholder coalition. We have this shared vision. We have indicators to monitor our progress. We have a plan, and we need implementation. So the vision that we have, this is the land use in Mato Grosso today. We had today 62% of our state preserved. It's an area bigger than Germany. And the idea is that the agriculture that we have can grow over areas that were occupied in the past, pasture areas that can be transformed in agriculture through intensification, through integration systems. And we can, in that way, preserve the environmental assets that we have. So the PCI is oriented by a big set of targets that contribute to the decarbonization of our economy. But the thing is that the government cannot do everything alone. We need to put together the public, the private sector, and we need to bring investments to this landscape. So we have the government doing our part, because our governor, our Secretary of Environment that are present here today, they had the vision, the leadership, and the courage to put the fight against deforestation on the top of their political agenda. And these are not only words. They have a plan, they have targets, they have investments, they have the use of technology to increase the detection of deforestation on real time. So the government is doing their part, and we are working to bring together the private sector and the investments that we need to transform that landscape. We have today concrete examples of financiers, engaged private sector, and projects on the ground, PCI partners that are implementing all these actions. The intensification of production, the implementation of the forest code, the restoration of forests, technical assistance to producers and smallholders. So is this ecosystem of financing, engaged private sector, local partners that will help to transform the landscape. We have examples on the soy supply chain. We have the examples on the beef supply chains with companies, processors, traders, retailers that are helping us to transform that landscape. So we have all these examples going on. And since 2019, with the support of the Mato Grosso government, we created the PCI Institute. That's a unique institution with transparent governance where we can articulate this public and private action and can also work as a financial mechanism to support the implementation of the PCI. We just published a policy brief measuring the gap of financing that we have. You know, how much money do I need to conserve the forests in Mato Grosso? How much money do I need to support producers with technical assistance, for example? And of course, there's a huge gap for the next 10 years. We understand that, you know, part of that will come from the state budget, part of that will come from credit lines such as the ABC program that was presented here by Mr. Fernando. The companies that we have today in Mato Grosso, they are issuing green bonds, and green bonds will be a big part of the solution to finance, you know, action on their supply chain. So we have Marfrig doing that, we have JBS doing that, we have AMAD doing that. So they are issuing green bonds to invest on their supply chains. A small part of that will come from international cooperation. We have programs today in Mato Grosso that are supported by the World Bank, by the United Nations, by German and United Kingdom governments. And we understand that can help us to solve some bottlenecks that we have. And a large part of that will come from private investments, and investments including from our producers in Mato Grosso. But one thing that can be a game changer for this is carbon finance, how we can transform the emission reductions that we are going to have into investments to help support the transformation of the landscape. So I think the most important message that I want to give today, Matt, first is, if you look at the subnational level, there's a lot of things that governors can do and are doing to support the fight against deforestation. The second one is, you have here, you know, your dairy industry, your pork industry is buying soy from Mato Grosso today. Denmark is buying beef from Brazil today. And if you ask the young people outside, they will probably say, you know, the best solution is to stop buying soy and beef from Brazil. But I don't think that can help. I mean, I think that can help to save the reputation of some corporations, but that's not going to help to transform the landscape. We need radical inclusion rather than exclusion. So we need to engage your companies, your importers, your traders into transforming that landscape. So if you want to reduce the risk that you have today, come to Mato Grosso, and you can be part of that. You can help us to invest on the landscape, to transform that, and to support our producers. And finally, what I said, we believe that carbon finance can help us to cover that financing gap that we have today. And there's the possibility today for companies to buy carbon certificates from emission reductions from Mato Grosso, and that money will come back to the landscape and support this transformation. So thank you very much.
A few questions have come in, and I'm going to get to those in a second. But I'm so curious because everybody's here, even previous to this panel, is talking about collaboration, and we need to help each other, we need to partner up, and now you say, come to Mato Grosso, help us. But what is it? If you were to explain to the people outside, how is it that we're going to help you? What do you need?
I think there are several levels of collaboration that we can establish between a landscape, a producing landscape, and the market, importers, or countries that are importing our products. So we have today, like I said, cooperation agreements of countries that are supporting Mato Grosso financing actions against deforestation, for example. But we do have private companies that are doing the same thing, and they can be part of this governance, helping us to define, the priorities, identifying the regions that we need to act, but supporting projects from our producers, projects from our civil societies, projects that are, improving the efficiency on the land use, helping the inclusion of smallholders, for example, payment for environmental services. We have different possibilities. There's a huge menu of possibilities how companies can help. And we are open to discuss that with anyone that is interested.
All right, so moving on to the questions that have poured in, because I want to prioritize those. We have previously debated some discussions that we wanted to bring up. We're a little bit late now, so I want to prioritize the questions that these nice people have sent. How is enforcement of forest code or other anti-deforestation legislation possible if funding of IBAMA continues to be decreased? Yeah, well, that's kind of a polemic question, isn't it? But how does one fund that if that is the case? Can you touch on that?
Well, I cannot answer for the federal government.
Of course
but
not.
What I can say is that IBAMA is one of the agencies that is helping to reduce deforestation. But you have, like I said, on the state level, a lot of things that can be achieved. And we have here our governor, our secretary of environment that can say all the actions that Mato Grosso is taking against deforestation. So the cut on the federal agency is compensated, but all the actions that we are doing on the state level.
So there's someone who wants to know about a little bit more about the Mato Grosso Zero Carbon Project, if it is also being implemented to other areas of Brazil. Is there something similar going on? I know I'm asking you being from Mato Grosso, but do you know?
There are other states committing to decarbonization goal, but
Not in this manner?
Yeah, I think the difference is that everything that is already in place in Mato Grosso. So we are not talking about something that will be implemented, but about actions that are already happening.
Let me just complement.
Yes.
If I can.
I'm gonna interrupt for a second because actually the ambassador would like to reply to the question submitted before about IBAMA.
Yes.
Please. No, please do.
I can answer by the federal government.
Yes.
Yes, please.
The question that has been proposed to our opinions. Actually, the budget for IBAMA, which is our environmental agency, has increased recently. So there was a kind of misunderstanding when the government announced some budget because of our fiscal policy controls. But actually, recently, the budget has been increased. So now we have a larger budget to IBAMA than we had previously. And also the federal government has approved an increase of hiring new people, also 700, if I'm not mistaken, more people for fiscalization working for IBAMA. So we are in this trend of increasing the budget and also the human resource working for the agency. So just to clarify this. But you're right, someone who made this question, because there were headlines about this, but if you see the updated news, you'll see that really we had an increase in the budget very recently. Thank you.
Thank you very much for answering that, Mr. Ambassador. Here's a question to Professor Jank. I think we have a lot of NGOs in here. They're not only outside. And I want to thank you for your questions. And I am aware that some of them are quite polemic. I hope you will bear with that. And I'll try to find the actual question in them when some of them are mere statements. So, Professor Jank, in the report co-authored by you about Amazon deforestation and soy and beef value chains, land grabbing, and large-scale land speculation, it is mentioned as one of the main drivers of the beef value chains, land grabbing, and large-scale land speculation is mentioned as one of the main drivers of deforestation. So civil society and all the serious environmental organizations in Brazil warn of the risks of PL 510 2021. Are you with me? And others that have together been named environmental destruction package. How can a law that allows occupation of public lands up to 2,500 hectares to be regularized help on the increasing deforestation rates in the Amazon? Did you get that? It was a long question.
Not completely, but
So
let
how
me-
can a law that allows occupations of public lands up to 2,500 hectares to be regularized help on the increasing deforestation rates in the Amazon?
No, actually, let me first point about what's happening here in terms of how can Danish companies and the Danish society participate on the.
Sure. Do you want to answer
on
that
the
first?
Yes, first. So I think one of the collaboration points between Brazil and Denmark would be on renewable energy for sure. See, renewable energy is really the big problem in terms of emissions, as you know. It's interesting because we are having COP next week, but we are having an energy choke in the world right now,
Yes.
correct? So problems in China because of coal, lack of coal energy. In Europe, a strong dependence on gas coming from Russia.
Yes.
Very high prices, you see.
Very big problems
A
in
huge
Great
problem.
Britain where you're all going.
This is the real problem today, correct?
Yes.
Is how to move to low carbon energy when we are facing an energy shock and very high prices. And as you know, renewable energy sometimes is intermittent, so we don't have the same assurance about having energy. So Brazil has almost 50% of renewable energy in the energy matrix. Denmark is also a very special country in terms of eolic energy and others. So this kind of cooperation, I believe, is very, very important, first of all. The second one is what Fernando said, you see. Brazil is doing big efforts today to implement the forest code that was approved a few years ago. Mato Grosso State is a good case. There's also the issue of land tenure in Brazil. You see, it's also a very important issue. And for sure, fiscalization, auditing. In one side, the government needs to do more in terms of the fiscalization and auditing of the criminality, because we are talking 98% of the deforestation today, the 1 million hectares per year, is illegal, which means it's criminal. So in some ways, IBAMA and other agencies and the state agencies, they need to act like we are seeing in Mato Grosso, in other parts of the country, especially the northern states. But
let me just insert a question here, because I know that you have been decreasing deforestation over many, many years, and now there's been a slight increase again.
Exactly.
So how could you, I mean, there is somebody who's asking, when are you going to stop deforesting? And that's such a complex question. But what if we rephrase that to asking, how could you draw on the experience from previously when you actually managed to decrease deforestation to decrease
sometimes
again?
it's a little difficult to understand. But first, eliminate illegal deforestation is key.
Yes.
Okay, and this is law enforcement.
Yes.
Because we have the law, we have the forest code, and we can do the regularization of the land titles in the north region. So this is law enforcement. On the other side, producers can deforestate under the law in Brazil, correct? Under the law. And the way to move to zero deforestation is to create zero deforestation supply chains, as companies in soybean or in beef are doing. The way to do that is a compensation, correct? A compensation for no deforestation. So payments for environmental services. The carbon markets, for example, all the discussions that will happen next week in Scotland about carbon markets, they are key, because we can move. We don't need to invade the Amazon to produce food in Brazil. We can produce food just increasing productivity in pasture areas. Pasture areas in Brazil are 180 million hectares. Agricultural areas are 70 million hectares. So pasture areas are more than the double of agriculture, cropland. So we can increase productivity there. And when we push from degraded pastures to crop livestock integration, we are reducing a lot carbon emissions. And we are producing much more per hectare. So this is the movement that we need to do.
Yes.
And the movement needs to be done through market incentives that are already happening, even without the regularization of the global carbon markets.
Right.
It's already happening, but it will happen more and more, and not only in Brazil, in other South American countries, in Africa, if we have the regularization of the carbon markets.
Right.
Matt, can I
Yes.
complement that? I think that it's different. The deforestation that we have in the 2000 until 2004, they were due to a process of territorial occupation that were incentivized by different Brazilian governments. So we had big plots of land being open to production, and all of that reduced with a lot of public policies and private actions like the soy moratorium and others. And the deforestation we have today is different. Are smaller plots, much related to illegality and timber extraction, this kind of stuff. So I agree with Marcos that this is law enforcement problem, and we're trying to do that at the state level. The legal deforestation we have to treat with incentives. We have today in Mato Grosso programs that are paying farmers not to clear the forest that they could legally clear. So this is already in place. So this is the kind of program that could be incentivized by supply chains that are interested in zero deforestation supply chains, or certification schemes that are already in place. So you have also different solutions to address the supply chain issues, but this is the solutions are on the table.
But I think what we're touching on now is how complex this all is. Somebody here is asking, so law enforcement is very important, yet new reports show that states in Brazil use less than 1% of their budgets on environmental protection and inspections. Is this also the case for Mato Grosso? But no matter how much we talk about law enforcement and protection, it's more complex than that, right?
It's more complex. And the thing is also that if you look at Amazon in Brazil in general, not only in Mato Grosso, is where people have the low standards for life quality. So there's more violence, there are poor, there's low income, and we are saying all of this force has a value, but the people that, we have 25 million people living in the Amazon that need an income to live, and the best thing they have is timber, mining, cattle. So we have to create a new kind of economy from the forest. So we are investing in projects, bioeconomy projects that can generate value from the forest. And we have experience from that in Mato Grosso, but this is something that we have also to invest a lot and to develop markets for this kind of products. So Mato Grosso has a huge timber industry working on sustainable management of forests. This is one of the ways that we can create value from the forest, but keeping the forest standing.
Somebody's talking about the whole issue of public opinion, especially in the younger generations that are worried that despite the efforts and initiatives towards climate change and biodiversity, the effect will be too little and too late. You're probably going to hear a lot about that in Glasgow coming week. What should be the industry and regulatory response to these voices and concerns? I want to rephrase that a little bit. What are you going to Glasgow with? You're both heading there. What are you going there with?
I believe that first of all we need to remember and take note that from 2004 and 2012, only 80 years, we reduced deforestation from almost 3 million hectares per year to 500,000.
And now up to 1 million.
Yeah, and now up to 1 million. But in 2015 in Paris, Brazil was a very proactive country, much more than Europe at that time, showing results of law enforcement in Brazil. So it's possible to reduce if we want, because we are talking about criminality.
Yes.
And this criminality has been growing in the last years, but can be reduced by law enforcement.
Yes.
The implementation of the forest code can be done, and Mato Grosso is a good case. And land titles is a big problem in many countries, but we can also solve those problems. So I believe that we should come to this meeting, first of all, to discuss, to present the case, and to find solutions in things that will be discussed. So like targets of the countries in terms of land use, but also in terms of renewable energy. I have the impression that Brazil will be appointed as one of the villains today. We were not in 2015, but today we are going to be presented as a villain in terms of land use. But let's remember that in energy, Brazil is a very important case of sustainable energy.
Yes.
And countries are moving in the right direction. Some countries are moving in the wrong direction today. So I think renewable energy is very important. The low carbon project that was presented by Secretary, that will be doubled in Brazil. Low carbon agriculture in Brazil, no-till, intensification of the pastures, etc. This is a very interesting case.
It is.
So I believe that we should work on a specific case, and we should work thinking about what the Brazilian experience can be used, what's the better way to use this for tropical areas, you see? In tropical areas, what can we do to increase productivity, to reduce degradation, to eliminate illegality? So this is, I think, the main topics that we should bring to Glasgow.
I think it's not only public opinion, but the last IPCC report is going to create a movement of different regulations from different importing markets and, impacting also the private sector with new rules and criteria to
You're talking about the due diligence rules coming up.
Yes,
Yes.
and I think there's a big risk on that of backfiring,
Well, there is, in fact, a question that came in on how Europeans can know whether deforestation has been involved in the products that they use. And that's kind of touching on that because there are new rules coming up, both from the EU and from the US and from the UK.
Like I said, if we work on sanctions and embargoes, that's not going to change the landscapes that are producing the food. You are going to make the food more expensive and difficult access, not for Europe, but for Asia and Africa, where they need it most. So
you're going to send them into the arms of the Chinese, and then they're going to sell their food.
No, because I think also the Chinese are going to impose regulations on imported deforestation some point in the future. But the thing is that if we started creating problems for trade, that will make the access to food more expensive and difficult for those people. And this is not going to have the effect they expect on the change in the landscape. But I think on the other hand, carbon finance, we want to export soy and beef and carbon also, that we are reducing emissions and keeping the forest standing. And that kind of creating that investment flow to the places that are producing preserve can actually help this transformation.
Well, you will have to put your question down here. I'm so sorry. We cannot start a discussion in the open. I'm so sorry about that. We unfortunately are a bit out of time, but we will continue touching on these subjects in the next panel. Do you have a closing remark that you want to state for this panel?
Just a final point about what Fernando said. We can produce 10 tons of grains per hectare, correct? Because you can produce 3.5 tons per hectare of soy, which is 30% more than any production in Europe in terms of productivity. And we can produce 6 tons of corn in the same area, so 10 tons per hectare. In temperate climate, US or Europe, you are going to produce 3 tons per hectare. So 30% of what we can do in tropical conditions. This is probably one of the best ways to solve the food problem, is to produce more in the same area. Double crop, triple crops per year without irrigation, you see? If we have a problem of deforestation linked to grains, we can eliminate this problem, creating zero deforestation supply chains. But when we say we're going to embargo soy from Brazil and they're going to produce soy in France, this is not the right solution, correct? Because we will always produce much more than France because of the tropical conditions. So let's try to go to the facts. Let's try to solve the problems, but not embargoes or say, let's not buy. You see, no, let's enforce a system.
Yes. Before I ask the same question to you, I want to say to all of you, this is an emotional topic, and people get angry. And I want to let you know that the acoustics in here is so that every time you talk, it's very loud up here. And every time you get angry and yell down there, we can hear it, but we don't really get the content of it. So I'm trying to ask the questions that pour in, and the easiest way is to write it here. And I'm perfectly aware that there are a lot of questions that would be nice to have to, dig very deep into. And we'll try to do that a little along the way, but we only have this framework of time to do so. So I hope that you will work with me on this. Thank you. So just for a closing of this panel that has been shortened a little bit, admittedly, a last message before we close this one down and shift into the next one.
Well, I think we have Denmark and Danish companies committed to sustainability goals. And we have, on the other hand, Mato Grosso, that is a producing region committed to sustainability goals. We're just trying to put these two together. So the idea is not only for Danish companies, for all the other markets, is try to buy your products on regions that are trying to do the right thing and showing progress on what they are trying to do. Because this is the way.
So you're saying don't be too harsh. Just work with us. Don't be too harsh with all your don't do the whip all the time. Do the carrot as well.
It's cooperation, not, sanctions.
And if they say, well, we have tried to cooperate for years and years and we don't think that it's going fast enough, what would your reply be?
Well, we have to accelerate. And I just showed, the complexity of this and the financing gaps and everything that we have to do.
And certainly the complexity of this is actually why we are here, isn't it? To actually open that up so we can get a better view of the complexity, because it is not easy. However you view it, it is not easy. Well, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for answering these. Some questions were difficult and some were easier, but I want to thank you for answering them and for showing up here and giving your points of view. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you want to introduce the next panel, Adriana? Yes?